The quiet was a shroud. It had been for so long now, a heavy, suffocating thing that pressed in on me from every corner of my small apartment. I traced the condensation on the window pane, watching the city lights blur into a watercolor smear. Another Tuesday night. Another night spent with the ghosts of blueprints and the acrid memory of smoke. My hands, once so steady, now trembled faintly when I held a pen. I hadn't designed anything substantial in years, not since the fire. The very word tasted like ash on my tongue. The house, my house, the one I had poured my heart and soul into, a testament to modern minimalism and open-plan living. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a haven for my family. Instead, it became their pyre. I closed my eyes, but the images were always there, flickering behind my eyelids, the orange glow against the night sky, the frantic shouts, the helplessness. My wife, her laughter, the way she used to hum while cooking. My children, their bright, curious eyes, their small hands reaching for mine. Gone, all of it, because of me. Because of a structural flaw, a material choice, a misplaced vent, 1,000 possibilities that circled my mind like vultures, each one a fresh stab of guilt. My days were a monotonous cycle. Wake, stare at the ceiling, force down stale toast, walk aimlessly, return, stare at the wall. The world outside felt distant, muted as if a thick pane of glass separated me from its vibrant chaos. Colleagues had tried at first, the sympathetic glances, the hushed tones, the offers of time off. I took the time off and it never ended. They stopped calling eventually. I didn't blame them. Who wants to be around a walking tomb? Then the letter arrived. Thick, cream-colored stationery, an embossed seal I didn't recognize. It lay on my scarred oak table for 3 days before I gathered the resolve to open it. My hands shook as I tore the flap. It was from a solicitor. A distant relative, a great-aunt I barely remembered, had passed away. He had left me everything. An ancestral home, tucked away in some forgotten corner of the countryside. A place called Blackwood Manor. The news hit me with a strange blend of disbelief and morbid curiosity. An ancestral home. I had no family left, not really. My parents were long gone, and the rest were just names in old photo albums. Why me? Why now? The solicitor's subsequent phone call, a crisp, efficient voice that crackled slightly with static, confirmed the details. He spoke of extensive grounds and considerable renovations required. He spoke of a legacy. I heard only empty. But a tiny, insidious thought began to worm its way into my grief-choked mind. A new place. A clean slate. Maybe, just maybe, an escape from the suffocating memories that clung to every surface of my current existence. A chance to breathe air that wasn't tainted by the phantom scent of smoke. It was a desperate, foolish hope, but it was hope nonetheless. I packed a single duffel bag. A few changes of clothes, a well-worn sketchbook, a box of charcoal pencils. I left the apartment as it was, a mausoleum of my past, and started the long drive. The city gradually receded in my rearview mirror, replaced by rolling hills and ancient gnarled trees that clawed at the bruised sky. The journey was long, the silence in the car broken only by the hum of the engine and the incessant whisper of my own thoughts. As I approached the address, the landscape grew wilder, the roads narrower, overgrown with brambles. The GPS signal wavered, then died. I continued on instinct, following what felt like a path less traveled, until a pair of rusted wrought iron gates, half hidden by ivy, loomed into view. Beyond them, a winding, gravel driveway disappeared into a dense thicket of trees. Blackwood Manor. It was a monstrous thing, even from a distance. A sprawling, Gothic edifice of dark stone and shadowed windows, rising like a forgotten sentinel against the twilight. Turrets clawed at the fading light, and chimneys stood like skeletal fingers. The grounds were a tangle of neglected gardens, choked with weeds and fallen leaves. This wasn't a fresh start. It felt more like an ending. I pushed open the heavy, creaking gates, the sound echoing through the stillness, and drove slowly up the drive. I parked the car, the engine's final sigh swallowed by the vast quiet. The front door was a massive slab of oak, studded with tarnished iron. The air inside was thick, stagnant, carrying the scent of dust, damp stone and something else. Something subtle and unsettling, like old paper and forgotten things. My footsteps echoed on the checkered marble floor, each sound amplified, swallowed, then returned. I walked deeper, my hand trailing along a dusty banister, the wood surprisingly smooth beneath my fingertips. Grand tapestries hung in tatters, their colors faded to muted ghosts. Furniture, draped in white sheets, stood like silent specters, their forms hinting at forgotten elegance. I found myself drawn to a narrow corridor, tucked away behind what must have been the old library. A heavy metal door stood at the end of it, unadorned, industrial in its starkness. Locked. I rattled it, testing its give. Nothing. My eyes scanned the frame, and I noticed the small, faded red lettering painted above the lintel, barely visible in the gloom. Emergency stairwell, door locked from outside. My brow furrowed. An emergency exit locked from the outside. It made no sense. A prickle of unease, sharp and insistent, began to spread through me. Who would lock an emergency exit into a house, and why? I turned away from the locked door, the faint smell of damp earth and something else, something vaguely metallic, clinging to my clothes. It was the house itself, a living, breathing entity watching me. And was I truly prepared to unearth them? It was a new place, I told myself, a new beginning. A mantra whispered over the growl of the engine as my car crunched gravel beneath its tires. The ancestral home loomed into view, a silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. It wasn't the quaint, charming cottage of my hopeful fantasies. This was a beast of a house, all gables and turrets, its stone facade stained with centuries of neglect. Empty windows stared like vacant eyes. A shiver, not entirely from the crisp autumn air, traced a path down my spine. I killed the engine. Silence, vast and heavy, descended. The only sound was the distant murmur of the wind through skeletal trees, a mournful sigh. My hand tightened on the steering wheel, gripped tight. This was it. The escape. The chance to breathe. The front door, a massive slab of oak studded with iron, groaned open with a sound like a dying animal. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust, damp stone, and something else, something ancient and stagnant, like forgotten memories. My footsteps echoed on the grand, checkered marble floor, each sound swallowed by the cavernous space. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in what felt like forever, and the silence was deafening. I chose a room on the second floor, a modest study overlooking a tangle of overgrown gardens. It felt less imposing than the sprawling master bedroom, less likely to hold the ghosts of generations past. My few boxes, containing what little remained of my life, sat forlornly in the center of the polished hardwood. Unpacking felt like an act of defiance against the suffocating emptiness. I placed my architectural drawings on a heavy oak desk, arranging my tools with meticulous care. Each item was a tiny anchor, holding me to the present, to the tangible. The house, however, had other ideas. A floorboard creaked in the hallway when I knew I was alone. I dismissed it. Old houses settled. Old houses had drafts. My mind, still raw from grief, was simply overactive, searching for threats where none existed. I tried to focus on the work, sketching out a rough plan for the house's restoration, a way to reclaim it, to make it mine. I found myself listening, not for specific sounds, but for the absence of them. I lit a few candles, their flickering flames casting dancing light across the ornate wallpaper, making the patterns shift and writhe. Later, a low growl of hunger in my stomach propelled me towards the kitchen. As I rummaged for something to eat, I noticed an anomaly. Tucked away behind a pantry, almost entirely obscured by a leaning stack of old firewood, was a door. It was unlike any other door in the house, plain, grey metal, utilitarian. It looked utterly out of place amidst the crumbling grandeur. My architect's curiosity was piqued. What was a door like this doing in an ancestral home built in the 1800s? I pushed aside the firewood, clicked open with a soft metallic thud. I reached for my phone, its flashlight beam piercing the gloom. It revealed a utilitarian concrete shaft, a stark contrast to the house's ornate interior, an emergency stairwell. The air inside was different, stagnant. It smelled of mildew and damp earth, a raw, subterranean smell. I stepped inside, the sole of my shoe scraping against the concrete, the sound echoing unnaturally. I took a few steps down, my light beam dancing ahead, trying to gauge the depth. It felt like an afterthought, a later addition, maybe from the mid-20th century, strange for a house this old. Then the click, my head snapped up. The door, the one I had just come through, it was shut, no answer. I scrambled back up the few steps, my heart racing. I grabbed the handle. It was solid, unmoving, locked. But I hadn't locked it. I hadn't even heard it latch properly. I rattled the handle, pulling, twisting, pushing. Nothing. The heavy metal door remained stubbornly shut. I pounded on it, yelling, "Hey, is anyone there?" My voice bounced off the concrete walls, marking me. My breath plumed in front of me. I was trapped. My mind raced, searching for a rational explanation. A faulty latch, a draft that slammed it shut and somehow engaged the lock, but locked from the outside. That made no sense. It was an emergency stairwell. They were meant to open outwards. My breath hitched. It was barely audible, like fingernails dragging across concrete or something heavier being pulled. I froze, straining my ears. The sound stopped. My skin prickled. I wasn't alone in this stairwell. I was sure of it. My hand was slick with sweat on the cold metal handle. My chest felt tight, my lungs struggling for air. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to take a slow, shaky breath. This was an old house. Old houses made noises. This was just my imagination, my grief-addled mind playing tricks. Then just as suddenly as it had shut, the lock clicked. The handle turned effortlessly beneath my trembling fingers. The door swung inward, revealing the dim, dust-filled kitchen. I stumbled out, gasping, my legs weak. I stared back at the plain metal door, now slightly ajar. Had it been locked at all, or had my panic made me imagine the struggle? Had I simply pushed the wrong way? But the scraping sound. It had been locked, and something had been down there. Who had locked me in was a beast, a skeletal behemoth of crumbling brick and sagging timber, choked by ivy and shadowed by ancient gnarled trees. The windows, dark and vacant, stared out like dead eyes. This wasn't a fresh start, it was a tomb. Still, I killed the engine. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. My inheritance, my burden. I had to make this work. I would make this work. The front door, monstrous slab of oak, groaned open with a sound like a dying animal. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of twilight filtering through grimy panes. I walked through the cavernous foyer, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the warped floorboards. Or was it a welcome? I couldn't tell. I spent the first hour simply walking, trying to map the labyrinthine layout in my mind. The house was a monument to a forgotten era, filled with heavy, draped furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts waiting to be unveiled. A grand staircase, its banister carved with intricate, unsettling patterns, dominated the central hall. Up close, the carvings looked less like decorative swirls and more like grasping tendrils reaching. I shook my head. Overactive imagination. Grief playing tricks. The first oddity was subtle. I'd stepped from a relatively cool room into a patch of air that felt like winter's breath on my skin, then back into merely cool. I blamed drafts, the faulty seals on ancient windows. But the drafts never seemed to move. They were fixed points, lingering, waiting. Then came the sounds. Not the expected groans of old wood or the whistle of wind through cracks. These were fainter, more deliberate. A dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across an upstairs floor. A soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap from behind a closed door. I'd freeze, listen, and it would stop. When I moved, it would resume, marking echo of my own caution. My heart started to beat a little faster, a frantic drum against my ribs. I told myself it was the house, settling. An old house makes noises. Of course it does. I tried to focus on practicalities, finding the fuse box, checking the water, anything to anchor myself to reality. I located the fuse box in a cramped utility closet off the kitchen. As I fumbled with the rusted metal latch, a faint, sweet smell drifted past me, not the dust and decay that permeated the rest of the house. This was cloying, sickly, like wilting lilies left too long in stagnant water. It reminded me, sickeningly, of a funeral parlor. I recoiled, coughing, but the scent was gone as quickly as it had appeared. My hand trembled as I finally got the box open. Later, as twilight deepened into true night, I found myself drawn to the back of the house, where the sounds seemed most concentrated. A low hum, almost a vibration, emanated from a section I hadn't yet explored. I pushed through a heavy velvet curtain, expecting a pantry or a servant's quarter. Instead, I found a narrow, unlit corridor. The air here was different, heavy, stagnant. At the end of the corridor, a plain metal door stood slightly ajar. Curiosity, or perhaps a morbid fascination, pulled me forward. I pushed the door open further, revealing an emergency stairwell, door locked from outside. The steps, concrete and worn, spiraled down into an inky blackness. A faint, rhythmic drip echoed from below. The hum intensified here, vibrating through the soles of my shoes. The air was dead, devoid of movement, yet I felt a strange current, a subtle pull. I took a tentative step onto the first stair, then another. The hum grew louder, a low thrumming that seemed to resonate inside my skull. And then, from the depths of the stairwell, a sound, so faint it could have been the blood rushing in my ears. A child's voice, my daughter's voice. "Papa," my breath hitched. My entire body went rigid. I knew that voice, impassable. I stumbled back, my heart racing, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My hand reached for the doorframe, seeking purchase, but my fingers found only empty air. The metal door, which I had left ajar, swung shut with a soft, sickening click. I spun around, my blood turning to ice. I grabbed the handle, twisting it with desperate force. It didn't budge. I rattled it, then pounded on the unyielding metal. "No, open up." My voice was hoarse, alien. I pulled, pushed, kicked. Nothing. The door was solid, immovable. My gaze fell to the handle again, then to the frame. There was no latch on my side, no lock to pick. It was a simple, brutal truth. The emergency stairwell door locked from outside. Panic clawed at my throat. I was trapped. It was my guilt, given form, given sound. My mind reeled. There was I finally breaking. There was the grief, the isolation, finally pushing me over the edge. There was this house merely a mirror reflecting my deepest fears, or was something else, something tangible, truly here with me? How would I get out? The echoes of that impossible whisper still vibrated in my inner ear, a phantom resonance that clawed at my composure. My guilt, given form, given sound. The thought was a relentless hammer blow to my skull. Was this it, the final fracture? The moment the world tilted irrevocably into madness. I pressed my palms against my temples, the rough wool of my sweater scratching my skin. No, I wouldn't allow it. I was an architect. I built structures. I understood logic, physics, the cold, hard realities of concrete and steel. There had to be an explanation. There had to be. My determination, a fragile thing born of desperation, began to solidify. If this house was playing tricks, I would dissect its mechanism. I would treat it as a faulty blueprint, a structural failure, a problem to be solved with measurements and observation, not with terrified resignation. I needed light. Real light, not the anemic glow of the single bulb I'd been relying on. I found a powerful floodlight in a dust-shrouded storage closet, a relic, perhaps, from some forgotten renovation. Its beam cut through the gloom like a scalpel, exposing the layers of grime and decay that clung to every surface. I started on the ground floor, moving systematically, my architect's eye scanning every joist, every beam, every brick. The house was a labyrinth of shardy repairs and perplexing additions. Walls that didn't quite align, doorways leading to sudden drops, windows boarded over from the inside. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something cloying and sweet, like wilting flowers left too long in stagnant water. My boots scuffed across loose floorboards, each creak a fresh jolt to my frayed nerves. I tapped, a dull thud, not solid brick. This house was a lie. I found the original blueprints, brittle and yellowed, tucked away in a locked oak chest in the study. The paper crumbled at the edges as I unrolled them, a faint smell of mildew and forgotten ambition rising from the aged parchment. My own designs, the crisp, clean lines of my modern creations, flashed in my mind, a stark contrast to the sprawling, illogical sprawl before me. The original structure, as conceived by my ancestor, was a grand, if idiosyncratic, design. But subsequent additions, scrawled in different inks and styles, had warped it into something grotesque. A room that didn't exist on the original plan, a staircase leading to nowhere, a chimney stack that seemed to terminate halfway up the roofline. My fingers traced a particularly jarring alteration. A section of wall marked reinforced, enclosing an area labeled emergency stairwell, door locked from outside. An emergency stairwell, locked from the outside. That made no sense. An emergency exit was for escape. Why would it be secured to prevent egress? Or more disturbingly, to prevent someone from entering that specific space? I stared at the blueprint, the meticulous lines blurring before my eyes. This wasn't just poor design, it was deliberate obfuscation. I spent hours, floodlight in hand, searching for this anomaly. Up and down the main staircase, through forgotten pantries and dusty conservatories. Each creak of a floorboard, each distant groan of settling timber made me jump. My breath hitched in my throat more often than not. Finally, in a rarely used wing of the house, tucked behind what looked like a disused laundry room, I found it. A door flush with the wall, made of heavy, unvarnished wood. It was almost invisible, blending perfectly with the surrounding paneling. No handle, no visible hinges. My architectural training screamed at the impossible concealment. This wasn't just a hidden door, it was an attempt to erase its very existence. I ran my hand over the surface, feeling the faint, almost imperceptible seam where the door met the frame. It was tightly sealed. I pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. No sound. No faint draft. Then a faint tremor, not in the floor, but in the wood itself, resonated against my palm. A deep, almost imperceptible hum, like a distant, massive generator. It vibrated through my bones, a low, unnerving frequency. It wasn't the house settling. It felt alive. I pulled back, my skin prickling. This wasn't just a structural oddity. This was a deliberate secret. What lay beyond that door in the emergency stairwell door locked from outside? Was it merely another architectural folly, or was it something far more sinister? Into my car and drive, until this place was nothing but a speck in my rearview mirror. But another, deeper part of me, the part that was still drowning in guilt, felt a perverse pull. This house, with its palpable sorrow, felt strangely familiar, like a reflection of my own internal landscape. Could it be that my grief was attracting this malevolence? The next morning, the locket was gone from the bedside table. In its place, etched into the dusty surface, were 3 distinct deep gouges, as if something sharp had been dragged across the wood. They formed an almost perfect triangle. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about my sanity anymore. Something in this house was playing a deliberate, terrifying game. What did the triangle mean? I spent the next few days not just cleaning, but meticulously examining the house. My architect's eye, a tool I thought I'd lost forever, rekindled with a desperate urgency. I tapped walls, inspected floorboards, traced the patterns of the ornate plasterwork. The house was a labyrinth of hidden spaces and strange inconsistencies. In the dusty pantry, behind a stack of forgotten canning jars, I found a loose brick. Behind it, a small, leather-bound journal. The journal was old, its pages brittle and yellowed, filled with elegant, looping script. It belonged to a woman named Elara, who had lived in the house almost a century ago. Her entries I had to leave. The decision, sharp and visceral, cleaved through the fog of my terror. The whisper, that impassable, intimate accusation, had not merely echoed in the air. It had taken root in my very bones, a parasitic vibration that threatened to unravel my sanity. This wasn't just a house. It was a cage, and the thing inside it, whatever it was, knew me. It knew my deepest wounds. It fed on them. I couldn't stay. What good would a call do? No, I had to get out. My feet moved before my brain fully caught up, a primal urge to flee overriding everything else. The front door, that was the most direct route. I stumbled through the grand hall, the polished floorboards groaning under my hurried weight as if protesting my departure. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence, pressing against my skin like a damp shroud. The silence was not empty. It was pregnant with expectation, a held breath waiting for my next move. I could feel eyes on me, not just from the portraits that lined the walls, their painted gazes following my every lurching step, but from the very fabric of the house itself. I reached for the brass handle, my fingers closing around the cold metal. It didn't budge. I pulled harder, twisting my muscles, straining. Nothing. It was locked. Not just locked, but stuck, as if an invisible hand held it fast from the other side. I pounded on the wood, the dull thuds echoing back at me, swallowed by the cavernous space. No use. The door was impassive, marking. My breath hitched. My eyes darted around the hall, desperate. Windows. But the ground floor windows were all barred, heavy ironwork twisting into ornate, impenetrable patterns. The upper floors were too high, the fall too dangerous. My mind raced, clawing at every possibility. Then a memory surfaced, a fleeting glance from the first time I'd explored the property with the estate agent. An emergency exit, a fire escape. Yes, there was one, tucked away in the older, less used wing of the house, a relic from a bygone era, perhaps a safety measure for the staff quarters. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I pushed myself forward, my legs burning with exertion, each step a desperate plea for escape. The temperature dropped further, a palpable shift that made the fine hairs on my arms stand on end. The air grew still, heavy, as if the very oxygen was being drawn out of the room. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, a dull ache that throbbed with every beat of my frantic pulse. The narrow, winding staircase creaked under my weight, the wood complaining with every ascent. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak light filtering through grimy windows, swirling like miniature specters. I reached the top landing, my lungs burning, and turned down a dimly lit corridor. The air here was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something cloying and metallic, like old blood. At the very end of the corridor, almost swallowed by the gloom, I saw it, a heavy, unpainted steel door, scarred with rust and neglect. I lunged for it, my hand outstretched, a desperate prayer on my lips. I twisted it, and to my immense relief, it turned. I pulled. A rush of cooler, fresher air, carrying the faint scent of rain and damp leaves, promised freedom. My heart soared. I was almost out. But as I pushed harder, the door stopped. It opened only a crack, perhaps an inch or two, then resisted. I pressed my shoulder against it, straining, grunting with effort. The door remained stubbornly fixed. I peered through the narrow gap, my eye struggling to adjust to the deeper blackness beyond. And then I saw it, or rather, felt it. I pushed again, a desperate, futile effort. The door didn't budge. My gaze dropped, following the edge of the door, and then I saw it. A heavy, rusted iron bar bolted across the frame from the outside, not just a simple lock, but a deliberate, permanent seal. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. This wasn't just stuck, it was barred. From the other side. This was an emergency stairwell, door locked from outside. My hands flew to the iron, shaking, pulling, testing the unyielding metal. It was solid, immovable. My reflection, pale and distorted, stared back at me from the grimy steel, eyes wide with a sudden horror. I was trapped. The house had swallowed me whole. Guilt, guilt, guilt. My legs gave out. The house was alive. It had planned this. It had known I would try to leave. It had been waiting. What did it want from me now that it had me completely in its grasp? The whisper had me. It was inside my head, no longer just around me. The cold steel of the emergency stairwell, door locked from outside, pressed into my back, a stark reminder of my failed escape. My legs had given out, and I was a crumpled heap on the landing, the metallic tang of fear thick in my mouth. It felt like a tide, pulling at the edges of my mind, threatening to drag me under. Images flickered, not memories of my own, but fragments, sharp and disjointed. A hand, gnarled and pale, clutching a heavy ledger. A silhouette, tall and gaunt, standing over a flickering flame. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something acrid, like old iron mixed with decay. I gagged, pressing a hand to my mouth, but the smell was internal, a phantom sensation. It didn't speak words, not truly, but impressions, feelings, truths that burrowed straight into my core. You are not the first. You are merely the culmination. My family, not just the house, my blood, my ancestors. It wasn't just the entity feeding on my grief. It was always feeding. Generations. I saw a flash. A woman, her face contorted in a silent scream, her hands tied with thick rope. These weren't visions from my past. They were echoes, reverberations in the very fabric of this place, forced upon my awareness. My family, the architects, the builders of this monstrous structure, had been more than just designers. They had been facilitators. Cultivators. It showed me the ledger, the one from my vision, not just a record of construction, but a tally, a grotesque accounting. Each entry wasn't a cost or a material, but a name, a life. each one a thread woven into the tapestry of this house, strengthening the entity, feeding its hunger. And always, always at the bottom of each page, a signature. My surname, stretching back through generations. My body convulsed, a wave of nausea washing over me. This wasn't just an entity, it was a parasitic legacy. My family hadn't simply inherited this house, they had inherited a pact, a terrible, silent agreement to provide for its needs. And the currency was sorrow, guilt, sacrifice. The blood calls, the grief sustains. The architect designs the prison and then becomes its captive. I was an architect. I designed the house where my family, my own guilt, the very thing that had driven me here, was the most delicious offering. I had walked straight into the trap. Not a victim of circumstance, but a chosen heir, primed by my own trauma to continue the bloodline's grim tradition. The entity hadn't just found me, it had summoned me. It had waited. My chest constricted. The air in the stairwell, already thin and stale, felt like lead in my lungs. I felt a connection, a resonance with the fear of those who came before me. The women whose faces I'd seen, the men whose pleas echoed in the walls. They were my blood, and they had all been sacrifices. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The house fire, the one that took my wife and child. It wasn't an accident, not entirely. My grief, my overwhelming, soul-crushing guilt had been harvested, cultivated. It was a bait, a lure meticulously crafted to bring me here, to this ancestral home, to this very moment. The entity had orchestrated my tragedy, guiding me back to the source of its power, to become the next offering. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms, my breath hitched. This wasn't about escaping a haunted house. This was about escaping a destiny woven into my very DNA. It had shown me its truth. It had shown me my truth. The reason I was here. The reason I was trapped. I pushed myself up, my legs trembling, refusing to remain crumpled on the floor. The steel door felt like a tombstone behind me. My family, the respected architects, the pillars of the community. They had been monsters or fools or both, bound to something unspeakable. And I, Raj, the last of them, was next in line. The air thrummed with a low, hungry vibration. It wasn't just the house that was alive. It was the entire bloodline, a chain of suffering, culminating in me. My design, my architecture, the very foundation of my career, felt tainted, corrupted. Had my ancestors used their craft to build not just homes, but elaborate traps for their own kind? My throat was raw. I was an integral part of its design now. It was pregnant with expectation. The entity had revealed its hand, laid out the rules of the game. It wasn't a game I had chosen to play. It was locked from the outside, completely. My mind raced, not with panic, but with a desperate, burgeoning fury. If I was a sacrifice, then what was the ritual? And what happened if the sacrifice refused to be offered? The cold realization was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, stealing my breath. The house hadn't just attracted me, it had summoned me. My guilt, the raw, gnawing emptiness left by the fire, was a beacon, a feast. I had walked straight into the trap, not blindly, but with a horrifying, almost complicit inevitability. The initial shock gave way to a surge of pure, unadulterated rage, not at the house, not at the entity, but at myself, for being so blind, for being so consumed by my own suffering that I hadn't seen the deeper, darker currents pulling me. I was an architect. I designed. I understood structures, their weaknesses, their hidden strengths. If this house was a mechanism, a trap, then it must have a flaw, a release. I started moving, not aimlessly, but with a frantic purpose. The house was no longer a sanctuary, no longer a mausoleum for my grief. It was a prison, and I needed to find its blueprint, its escape route. My mind, usually a chaotic storm of regret, now focused with an almost desperate clarity. Instead, I sought out the forgotten corners, the neglected spaces that even the entity might overlook. I remembered a small, rarely used door tucked away behind a tapestry in the library, a door I'd dismissed as a utility closet during my initial, superficial exploration. Now it called to me. The heavy tapestry, thick with dust and the scent of aged fabric, felt strangely resistant as I pulled it aside. A faint, metallic scent, like old iron and damp earth, wafted from within. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the confined space. The passage twisted, descending in a series of uneven steps, the walls rough-hewn stone rather than the finished plaster of the main house. This was older, much older. The passage opened into what appeared to be an emergency stairwell, door locked from outside. The metal steps, rusted and groaning under my weight, spiraled downwards into a blackness that felt absolute. Above, a sliver of weak, grimy light filtered through a small, barred window near the ceiling, barely illuminating the dust motes dancing in the frigid air. The air was thick with the smell of stagnant water and something else, something cloying and sweet, like decaying flowers. Each step was a gamble, the metal groaning a protest beneath my shoes. How had I never noticed this? This entire section felt alien to the rest of the house, a raw, utilitarian scar hidden beneath layers of ornate decay. The stairs seemed to go on forever, descending into the very foundations of the structure. I reached a landing, a small concrete platform. A heavy, iron door, pitted with rust, stood before me. It had a single, massive bolt, clearly designed to be operated from the other side. Panic flared, sharp and sudden. I tried the door, pushing, pulling, but it was solid, unyielding. I looked up the stairwell, back the way I came. The narrow passage I'd entered through was gone, replaced by a solid wall of ancient stone. No, not replaced. It had never been there. The stairwell was a dead end. I was trapped. A low, guttural hum vibrated through the concrete beneath my feet. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but one I felt deep in my bones, a resonant frequency that threatened to shake me apart. The air grew heavy, pressing in on me, stealing the oxygen from my lungs. This was its doing. It had lured me, cornered me. My gaze fell to the floor near the iron door. Partially obscured by a drift of dry, skeletal leaves and cobwebs was a small, ornate wooden box. My fingers, trembling, brushed away the debris. The box had no visible lock, only a subtle seam running along its top edge. With a soft click, the lid popped open. Its edges were crumbling, the paper yellowed and translucent in places. I carefully unrolled it. The script was archaic, a spidery, elegant hand, but it was English. My eyes scanned the words, recognizing a few, then more, piecing together fragments of meaning. It wasn't a diary, not a letter. It was a technical document, a set of instructions disguised as a ritualistic text. The grief, the profound sorrow shall be channeled through the edifice. The cornerstone, the heart of the structure where the sorrow converges, must be kept sealed, lest the hunger consume all, a sacrifice of the purest anguish. The architect must understand the sacred geometry, the binding word, the counterbalance of joy. My breath hitched. Sacred geometry. The architect. It was talking about me, about my ancestors, about this house. The entity didn't just feed on grief. It was bound by it, channeled by the very architecture I was a master of. But what was the heart of the structure? And what could possibly be a counterbalance of joy in a place so utterly steeped in despair? My eyes darted back to the iron door, then to the swirling patterns on the scroll. It was all here, in plain sight, hidden in plain sight for centuries. But if the entity was bound by grief, could it also be weakened by joy? How could I possibly find such a thing in this house, in this life? Agonizing peace. How could I fight a house that fed on my very soul? I retreated to the library, seeking refuge amongst the dusty tomes, anything to distract from the oppressive presence. I found myself drawn to a specific section, an alcove filled with old architectural texts and ledgers related to the manor's construction. Among them, tucked into a crumbling volume on local folklore, was a crudely drawn map of the house, labeled Blackwood Manor, the Weeping Heart. It showed not just the visible rooms, but several hidden chambers, including one marked with the ominous triangle I'd seen etched on the bedside table. This secret chamber was located deep within the oldest part of the house, beneath the ground floor, accessible only through a disguised panel in the oldest part of the cellar. The map was annotated with cryptic warnings, the source of the sorrow, where the roots intertwine, and do not wake the architect. The last phrase sent a chill through me. The architect. Was this a reference to whoever built the house, or something else entirely? Was this entity merely using the house, or was it intrinsically bound to its very structure, a living monument to despair? The cellar entrance was a heavy, bolted trapdoor beneath the kitchen floorboards, hidden beneath a forgotten pantry shelf. The air that wafted up was thick, sacred geometry. The architect. The words still echoed in the hollow space behind my ribs, a cold, undeniable truth. It was talking about me, my family, this house, and what could possibly be. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. I stood in the main hall, the air thick with the dust of ages and the invisible weight of countless sorrows. My fingers, still trembling, traced the intricate carvings on the newel post, the same patterns I'd seen in my ancestors' journals, the same ones I'd dismissed as eccentric flourishes. Now they were a language I was beginning to understand, a terrible cipher. If the entity spoke of architecture, of sacred geometry, then the heart had to be a physical place, a focal point of its power, a chamber designed for its purpose. I thought of the house's blueprints, the ones I'd studied obsessively, searching for flaws, for hidden spaces. I had always assumed it was simply an unmapped utility crawl space, too small to bother with. Now, a shiver ran down my spine. It was too deliberate, too hidden. I moved, a man possessed by a grim purpose. The house groaned around me, a living thing aware of my intentions. Each floorboard creaked a protest under my weight. I made my way to the servants' wing, a part of the house I'd largely avoided, deeming it irrelevant to my solitary existence. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light filtering through grimy windows. It wasn't on any floor plan. It wasn't a utility closet. This was the entrance to the unknown. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel a faint vibration against my palm, a low hum that seemed to resonate with the tremor in my own bones. I twisted the handle. It turned with a reluctant groan, the sound echoing like a dying gasp. The door swung inward, revealing not a room, but a cavernous space, an emergency stairwell, door locked from outside. The air that rushed out was frigid, carrying the deep, earthy smell of the grave. The stairwell spiraled down into absolute blackness, the concrete steps slick with condensation. A single, bare bulb dangled precariously from a frayed wire far above, casting a feeble, flickering glow that only accentuated the gloom below. I stepped inside. The door, heavy and solid, swung shut behind me with a sickening thud. The click of the lock mechanism was sharp, definitive. I tried the handle, locked, from the outside. There was no going back now. My only path was down. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest, making each breath an effort. Water dripped somewhere far below, a rhythmic, maddening plink, plink, plink. The descent felt endless. I lost track of time, of how many turns I'd made. The spiral became a dizzying vortex, pulling me deeper into the earth, deeper into myself. The faint hum I'd felt at the door grew stronger, a low thrumming that vibrated through the soles of my shoes, up my legs, settling in my skull. It wasn't just the house now. It was in me. Soft, indistinct, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. They were just at the edge of hearing, fragments of sound that dissolved when I tried to focus on them. I heard my family's names, distorted, stretched. I heard the crackle of fire, the roar of the inferno I had designed. My guilt, a constant companion, sharpened into a physical ache, a clawed hand squeezing my windpipe. The stairs finally gave way to a flat, packed earth floor. I stood in a vast, underground chamber. The single bulb from the stairwell was now a distant star, offering no illumination here. The chamber was immense, far larger than any part of the house above. In the center, dominating the space, was an enormous structure. It was a column, impassably tall, reaching up into the unseen ceiling. But it wasn't just a column. It was a monstrous, inverted spire, narrowing as it descended, terminating in a jagged point that pierced the floor. They weren't decorative here. They were functional lines of force, channels for something immense. As my flashlight beam crawled over the column, I saw them, tiny, almost imperceptible carvings embedded within the geometric patterns. Figures, not human, not animal, twisted, elongated shapes, writhing in silent agony. And at the very base of the spire, where it plunged into the earth, a single massive carving. It was a face, or what approximated one. A gaping maw devoid of eyes, stretched in an eternal scream. And within that maw, like a terrible tongue, was a smaller, more refined carving, the architect's compass and square, the symbol of my profession, the symbol of my family, intertwined with the monstrous form. This was the heart. This was where it fed. This was where it was bound. My ancestor hadn't just built a house. They had built a prison, a conduit, and somehow, through my own design, my own grief, I had become the unwitting key. The entity wasn't just contained by the geometry. It was the geometry, a living, malevolent structure. My family, the architects, had used their craft not to create, but to trap this horror, binding it with the very principles I held sacred. But if it was bound here, why was it reaching out, tormenting me? And what did it want with the architect's bloodline? The intricate carvings on the newel post felt cold beneath my fingertips, a stark contrast to the sudden fever in my mind. My ancestors' journals, filled with obsessive sketches and cryptic notes, had depicted these very patterns, not as mere ornamentation, but as conduits, as lines of force. A chilling realization began to coalesce, drawing together years of architectural training, my own intimate knowledge of structure, and the insidious dread that had been gnawing at me since I first stepped through the front door. This house wasn't just built, it was designed. It was a cage, or perhaps a battery. I pulled my hand back, the wood suddenly feeling alive, humming with a low, inaudible vibration that resonated deep in my bones. The air in the main hall thickened, growing heavy, tasting of dust and the metallic tang of old sorrow. It was the same taste I'd felt in the ashes of my own home, a bitter echo. The flickering gaslights, the only illumination in the vast space, seemed to dim, their flames shrinking, struggling against an unseen pressure. My breath hitched. The house was reacting. It knew I was seeing its true nature. The journal spoke of sympathetic resonance, of emotional currents channeled through specific materials and structural geometries. My ancestor hadn't merely been a builder, he'd been a sorcerer of stone and timber, crafting a vessel to contain or amplify something. And I, with my own hands, had unwittingly echoed his work, designing a house that had become a tomb. This house, my ancestral house, was a larger, more complex version of the one that had consumed my family. It was a machine for grief, and it had been feeding. I had to stop it. My architectural eye scanned the hall, seeing past the peeling wallpaper and the cracked plaster. The entity wasn't just in the house. It was the house, or at least inextricably linked to its fundamental design. Its power was drawn from the very sorrow that permeated these walls, from the legacy of grief and guilt passed down through generations. My grief, my guilt, was a feast. It wasn't words, just a sibilant sigh, a hungry sound that vibrated the tiny hairs on my neck. My skin prickled. I could feel its presence coalesce, pressing in from all sides, a vast, formless weight. It knew my thoughts. It knew my intent. The only way to fight it, I realized, was to dismantle its power source, to disrupt the very architectural principles that sustained it. The journals mentioned a central node, a fulcrum of emotional energy, usually located in the deepest, most inaccessible part of the structure. My mind raced, sifting through floor plans, mental blueprints, visualizing the house as a living, breathing mechanism. The basement, of course, but not the main cellar, something deeper, something sealed. A low groan rumbled through the floorboards, vibrating up my legs. The house was alive, protesting. It didn't want me to find its heart. The temperature plummeted with every turn, the air growing thick and heavy, like breathing liquid. I could feel the entity's tendrils reaching, testing, trying to trip me, to lead me astray. I knew the way. My ancestors' journals had hinted at it, and my own architectural instincts, honed by years of studying complex structures, guided me. The stench of damp earth and something else, something cloying and ancient, filled my nostrils. Then I saw it. A heavy, iron-bound door, almost swallowed by the crumbling stone wall. It was unmarked, deliberately hidden. This had to be it. The door to the emergency stairwell, door locked from outside. The very description in the journals had seemed innocuous, a standard architectural notation. But now I understood. It wasn't an emergency exit from the house. It was an emergency seal for something within it, and the lock on the outside meant it was meant to keep something in. My heart hammered against my ribs. It didn't budge. The lock, a monstrous padlock encrusted with rust, held fast. I felt a surge of despair. How could I get in? Then, a flicker of understanding. My ancestor wouldn't have just locked it. He would have sealed it, interwoven the very fabric of the house with its containment. The carvings, the patterns, they weren't just on the newel post. They were everywhere, subtly integrated into the very structure. They were the keys. I ran my hands over the cold stone around the doorframe. Barely visible beneath layers of grime and ancient paint, I found them, faint, almost eroded etchings, mirroring the patterns on the newel post. They formed a complex sigil, a binding ward. This wasn't a lark to be picked. It was a puzzle to be solved, an architectural puzzle. As I traced the lines, the air around me crackled. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the stone, shaking the dust from the ceiling. The entity was enraged. It didn't want me to complete this. It didn't want me to understand. My fingers, guided by instinct and the phantom echoes of my ancestor's hand, followed the intricate spirals and angles. I pushed where a beam would connect, pulled where a joint would separate. I visualized the house not as solid matter, but as a flow of energy, a circuit. If the house fed on grief, then perhaps a surge of pure, unadulterated resolve could overload it. My resolve. My determination to end this, to finally break free from the cycle of guilt that had plagued my family and me. A faint click. It was the collective weight of generations of sorrow, magnified, weaponized. My knees buckled, my mind reeled. It was trying to break me, to drown me in the very emotions it fed upon. I fought back, clawing for air, for clarity, my family, my guilt. I wouldn't let it win, not again. I stepped through the threshold, into the emergency stairwell, into the consuming blackness. The door, with a final, echoing shudder, slammed shut behind me. I was alone, utterly, irrevocably alone, in a space that felt like the throat of something ancient and hungry. What was I supposed to find down here? What architectural secret could possibly defeat this thing? A chill, cold as grave dust, shot through my arm, vibrating up into my chest. It wasn't just the wood. It was the house itself, a sudden, violent shiver that made the very timbers groan. The patterns, these ancient conduits, glowed faintly in my mind's eye, a network of energy now fully awakened. My ancestor hadn't merely designed them. He had charged them, infused them with a purpose I was only now beginning to comprehend. They weren't just lines of force. They were veins, pumping something cold and hungry into the structure. Then, the floorboards beneath me buckled. I stumbled back, my hand tearing away from the newel post as dust rained down from the ceiling, stinging my eyes. The entire house groaned, a living thing in agony, or perhaps in ecstasy. A low, guttural moan echoed from somewhere deep within the walls, a sound too vast for any human throat. I scrambled away, my feet tangling in the debris of plaster and splintered lath. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something cloying and sweet, like wilting lilies left too long in stagnant water. The temperature plummeted. I could feel the entity now, not just as a presence, but as a physical weight pressing down, forcing the air from my lungs. It was angry. My understanding, my touch, had provoked it. It had been content to feed, but now it sought to consume. A crack, jagged and black, snaked its way across the ceiling above me, widening with a sickening crunch. More dust, larger chunks this time, rained down. The house was tearing itself apart, or being torn apart by something within it. The entity wasn't just in the house. It was the house, its malice woven into the very foundations, the beams, the brick. Every creak, every groan, every shudder was its breath, its heartbeat. Panic seized me. I had to get out, but where? The front door felt miles away, blocked by whatever spectral horrors might be waiting. I remembered the emergency stairwell, tucked away behind the pantry, a forgotten escape route I'd found during my initial inspections. It was narrow, unlit, but it was outside. Or at least it led outside. I ran, my legs burning, pushing past overturned furniture and hanging tapestries that seemed to writhe in the sudden drafts. The moan intensified, morphing into a ragged gasp, a sound of immense suffering and insatiable hunger. It was coming from everywhere, nowhere, inside my head, inside the very walls. My chest tightened, each breath a struggle against the crushing pressure. My vision blurred at the edges. I could feel the entity trying to worm its way into my mind again, offering visions of my family, their faces alight in the flames, their screams echoing in the smoke. It wanted my grief, my guilt. I wouldn't give it another drop. I burst through the pantry door, sending a cascade of empty jars clattering to the floor. The emergency stairwell was a black maw, barely visible in the faint light filtering from the main house. I plunged into it, fumbling for the railing, my hands scraping against rough concrete. I descended blindly, taking the steps 2 at a time, my heart racing like a trapped bird. I could hear the house above me groaning, the sounds of splintering wood and collapsing plaster growing fainter, swallowed by the thick concrete walls. A sense of perverse triumph surged through me. I was escaping. I was getting away. I was leaving the wretched thing behind. Then I reached the bottom. A heavy metal door painted a faded, peeling green stood before me, the emergency exit, freedom. I grabbed the handle, twisting it with all my might. It didn't budge. I pulled, pushed, rattled it violently. Nothing. My breath hitched. I slammed my shoulder into it once, twice, the impact jarring my teeth. The door held fast, solid, immovable. A small, rusted padlock hung from a hasp, its shackle thick with corrosion. It was locked. From the outside, I wasn't escaping. I was trapped. The low moan from the house above was gone. Everything was still, too still. I pressed my ear against the cold metal, listening. No creaks, no groans, no falling debris. Just the heavy, dead quiet of the sealed space. Had it stopped? Had the entity retreated? Or was this just another, more insidious part of its game? What was waiting for me on the other side of that door? Presence. You won't have me. I slammed the lid of the box shut with a desperate clang, the sound echoing unnaturally in the small chamber. The hum intensified to a piercing shriek, the shadows lunging forward. The stone panel behind me, my only exit, slid shut with a grinding rasp, plunging me into absolute darkness. I was trapped, utterly, completely trapped in the heart of its domain. The air grew heavy, suffocating, filled with the stench of decay, and something else, something cloying and sweet, like rotting flowers. Join us. My family is here. They await I. It was trying to break me, to wear me down, to make me surrender my grief to its insatiable hunger. I felt the tiny, grotesque faces of the figurines, their silent suffering. This was its weakness, its connection to the source of its power. If it fed on sorrow, perhaps I could starve it. But how do you starve an entity that feeds on the very essence of your being? How do you fight a house that knows every corner of your soul, every flicker of your